This is our fourth community panel discussion, and today's topic will focus on housing and campus safety. I also like to remind you that we are recording this panel discussion, and it will be uploaded on our website for you or anyone to come back later on to view. With that being said, I'm going to invite our panelists, based on the way they appear on my screen, to share with us a little bit about themselves. Just take a minute, then we'll jump into the questions. So one of the things we've learned, we've always run out of time, so we'll jump into it quickly. I'll start. I'm Ibrahim Bangura. Most of you know me as Ibi or Chaplain Ibi, and I'm one of the chaplains here at Albright. And I want to invite Amanda Mado, who from now on I will just call her as Mado, because as you notice, we have two Amandas on our panel today. Mado?
Yeah, so as Evie said, I'm Amanda Maddow. You can call me Maddow, whatever's easier. There's a lot of Amandas on campus. I'm the Assistant Director for Housing and Operations. Most of what I do at Albright involves housing assignments. I also oversee the affinity housing and their programming there. And then I assist with RA training, recruitment. So I do a lot of things with residential life. I am an Albright alum too, so I've been at Albright professionally for about 4 years now, and I was a student right before I started working at Albright.
Thank you, Mado. Amanda?
Perfect, thank you, Evie. I'm Amanda Higginbotham. I am the Director of Res Life. I have been at Albright for a little over 4 years, came from Kentucky, moved up north to get a different experience. And so I'm the primary administrator for the Res Life program. Live very close to campus with my family and very excited to be here and having this dialogue with everyone.
Thank you, Amanda. Mike?
Good morning, everyone. Mike Gross. I'm the Director for Public Safety. I've been in Albright for a number of years. I am also an Albright alum, although a little later in life than most traditional students. I grew up in Reading, went to Reading High. I was in the military for several years, and when I moved back into this area, my wife and I, we actually moved into the Reading area again, and then shortly after my son was born, I actually moved up to the Bern Township area, and I've been there ever since. So glad to be a part of the panel and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mike. Jackie?
Thanks, Evie. My name is Jackie Fetro. I'm president of Albright College and also professor of chemistry and biochemistry. I've been here for 3 years, though I'm also an alumni of this institution from way back a long time ago. I want to thank Evie for continuing to organize these panels. I think these have been great conversations, and to have them on an ongoing basis. And also to thank today's panelists for joining me today. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Eric?
Good morning. My name is Eric Jenkins. Welcome, everybody. I'm a captain here at Public Safety. I've been here for about 3 years now, and I'm born and raised in Reading, Pennsylvania, as well as Mr. Gross is. And I spent several years working with the county in juvenile corrections, residential facilities, and so forth. So I've always had some type of interaction with kids or youth. And just excited to be here in this panel and to offer any insight that I possibly can. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Eric. So before we start asking the question, before we start our dialogue and discussion, I want to say to you, the participants, we welcome you to engage the panelists. We welcome you to ask your questions. In the Q&A, you can simply submit your questions, and your questions will be sent to me, and I'll read those questions to our panelists. You can ask general questions for all the panelists, or you can ask specific questions for a specific department. As you may know or may have observed, there are two departments represented here. We have housing, we have campus safety, and we have Jackie representing the administration. So this first question will go specifically to the housing and campus safety. How would you describe your department's, maybe you or your department's relationship with students, especially with students of color?
I'll jump in first. So I think right now it's really important. Well, first of all, I'd say that I think our relationship is good. However, as with anything, there's exceptions. And I think that is based on our interaction with people and based on what we're, you know, the different incidents that we sometimes respond to here related to our role within the college. I would say that I think it's really important for anyone right now that's wearing a badge on their chest or on their person to be especially mindful of their role within the community and how they interact with the people within the community as well, and how they're communicating with someone. And I'm going to put an emphasis on the communication part, because communication is always probably the most central role and vehicle as to how you're going to be able to interact with someone and how the relationship's going to move forward. It's really important when you come in contact with someone that you treat everybody fairly, consistently, and you treat them with respect. Because when you don't do those things, usually that's when the relationship's going to go south. And obviously, as we've seen, a relationship can go south pretty quickly when you're not communicating with someone and treating them properly or with the respect that they deserve.
And for the residential life side, thank you for asking this question. I think it was one that I was able to reflect on quite a bit over the weekend. And over the past several years, we've truly seen many changes in how we operate and how we implement our residential life program on campus. And very much to speak to what Mike was saying too, a lot of our relationships are built on the communication with students and how we engage students. We've been very intentional, including a revised programming model and focusing on diversity and inclusion within that programming model, and also empowering our student staff to engage the residential communities authentically and with thoughtful discourse. And I know Matt is going to get into that a little bit later with some of our further discussions. But I believe we are starting to get to a point where stronger relationships are being built among all of our students, and in particular our students of color. And I think that's mirrored in the one-on-one conversations we're having and the continued discourse and dialogue we're having. Last week we had, myself and another professional staff member, had a really good conversation with a student staff member who's overseeing a building right now. And that the transparency and the willingness to listen and learn is becoming very apparent. And we're still here listening and learning. So.
I'll answer briefly. As many of you know, it's been a priority in the President's office since I arrived to put inclusivity and equity as one of our 5 institutional priorities. Kathy Caffancelli and Lana Haufler and I in my office work very hard. One of the biggest ways we interact with students is the President's Student Advisory Council, which is usually between 20 and 30 student leaders on campus. And we look very intentionally at that group to be sure that it mirrors the student body, that these student leaders mirror the student body in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, etc. And so we have a very diverse group of students that we meet with on a monthly basis, and many of them talk to Kathy lots in between. So working very hard to focus on that kind of inclusivity and access to the President's office.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I'd like to just offer a little bit of insight as well to piggyback.
Absolutely.
Director Gross, communication is key, is critical, and forming those rapports and those relationships with our student body, more in particular in this discussion of the African American students. Last year, prior to obviously the pandemic, I made it a point to reach out to a couple of organizations, sit down with some of their e-board members, and kind of just check in with them, touch base A few I've actually even mentored as well. And I find that it's just critical to have those relationships, because when issues arise, from a public safety standpoint, a lot of times the interaction or the situation, the basis of it is kind of a negative situation. So we try to, reach an amicable agreement. We develop those relationships and make sure that everybody's voice is heard across the board.
Thank you for that. So a few of you have mentioned relationship and communication, and that's something I would like to come back to at some point. But those are really two key phrases, words that I think are so important, and that's part of what we're doing here right now. I want to circle back to a question that I wanted to ask. So, Jackie, you mentioned that one of the things that you really strive to do is to, as much as possible, for the student leadership to mirror the student body. And I want to tie this in with a question, and this is to everyone. Can you discuss with us or share with us your hiring process? How do you vet and train your team, whether it's administration, res life, or campus safety? What's your hiring process like, and how do you vet and train your team?
So I'll start off again. Obviously we'll take the HR equation out of it, because I don't think that's the purpose of this. So from our perspective in here, when we're looking at candidates, we're reviewing candidates, we're having discussion regarding candidates. It's an equal parts discussion between the supervisory staff here within the public safety office. That would be myself, obviously Eric Jenkins, John McCormick, who's our assistant director, and we just hired recently a lieutenant in our department as well. So all of us have conversations, we review all of the applications, and after that we have discussions regarding who we would like to bring in for interviews, and from there we interview them together. And then we have discussions afterwards. And to be honest, I think that's the best way that you can do something from a collaborative perspective, instead of one person necessarily making all the decisions. From a training perspective, we obviously have protocols, policies in place regarding what we want people to have awareness of and how we train them. So we go through that process. We have training people that actually work with them for a couple of weeks before they're out on their own and following forth and doing what we need to do within the community. And then also we're looking at outside resources as well and making decisions as to what training, because there's a lot of things in order for people to investigate that they actually have to be certified to investigate certain things before we can even have them look into some of these incidents. So there's different things that we look at from the outside as well, as far as what type of training that they need that we cannot necessarily provide here from an in-house perspective. The one thing I always say is I always try and look at things from a now perspective, both from training and from hiring, instead of looking at it from this is what necessarily has worked best for this many years. Because as you move forward in time, if you continue to take the same perspective and you don't look at new things, or you don't try and look at things from different perspectives, I think you become stale. And that's the last thing you want to do, especially in a higher education environment. Change is consistent. And if you don't change, to be honest, in my perspective, you become a dinosaur, and I really don't want to become a dinosaur. So I just kind of continue to try and look at things with a fresh perspective. And to be honest, that's what the people that I work with help me do as well, because sometimes they bring something I may not be looking at. That's why we collaborate and why we end up with making a group decision.
Right. I'll jump in. For residential life, we have pretty much two different hiring processes that can happen at any given time. One is for our professional staff, and the second is for our student staff. From a professional staff side, we are very intentional with our interview process, our search process of where we go to to engage people who are really going to be committed to our students and the student experience, but who have the qualifications and are willing to engage students as well. Unfortunately, in student affairs, it's a very homogenous group, but we are very intentional in our most recent hiring process to hire professional staff members who know Albright students, who can engage Albright students and really meet students where they're at. For our student staff process is something we're also always changing, always improving. But for the past couple of years, we've really been happy to see that the students we are bringing in to be RAs and lead RAs are very reflective of our student population. It's a very in-depth process to hire RAs. It starts through day 4 as an application, resume, moves into a group process, and then individual interviews with residential life. And we are very intentional about who we hire, that we want students who are engaged with the community and skillful with their job. And Maddo is very good. She oversees the hiring process as well as the training process to get students in a position where they feel comfortable and empowered within their community. And I'm going to give her a few minutes to talk about that peer education program.
Yeah, so part of our training process, we do a certified peer educator program, and it is through NASPA, and that is a student affairs professional organization. And what that program does is it teaches students a lot of peer mediating skills. It teaches them how to identify differences between themselves and other students, recognize that those differences are there, and come up with a plan to include everyone, regardless of where their background is coming from. And then for those students who can sometimes be harder to reach, the Certified Peer Educator program gives our RA staff the tools to kind of reach out to them and try to get them more engaged in our community. There's a big focus in identifying all of the different identities that people can have, whether it's their socioeconomic, their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity. It's a very all-encompassing program. And we usually get a lot of great feedback from our students that they've enjoyed it, and that's why we continue to bring it back year after year. On top of the in-house training that we do, which is usually a week and a half to 2 weeks of all-day intensive training for them to learn their administrative tasks as well as working with their peers.
I'm sure maybe a couple of you may want to add to this. So I'm going to add to that question because I think you're in line with the next question I want to ask. But before I go further, I want to pause and just invite our participants / attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask and share them with us in the Q&A, and I will be able to share your questions with our panelists. So, Maddo, you're already going a little bit into like specific training, and again, this is not just for you, Maddo. This is for everyone, right? How do you specifically train your team, whether it's your staff or your student leadership team, your entire team? How do you train your team to identify prejudices and racism in themselves, and whether it's prejudice in themselves or in other people, their colleagues, and how do you train them to identify those feelings, or whatever term you want to give that, and B, what training do you offer for them to navigate that?
So I'll jump back in to touch on one of my favorite parts of the CPE training. And this is when we kind of start our conversation in that training about different identities. Usually I co-facilitate with another member of PRO staff. And what we do is we ask the students to look at us and identify who they think we are. And and we do this training with new RAs, so they haven't really worked with us before. And we will keep that conversation going until they start trying to guess things about us that maybe they'll start guessing our sexual orientation and our gender identity. And we will do this with them for about 20 minutes where they just try to identify what they view in us. And then that opens dialogue for us to break down, why they got to that conclusion and what pieces were they spot on and what pieces they weren't. And usually they're not very spot on about a lot of things. And so that helps us talk with them about, being able to identify, differences in their community. And then we get into more training on how to program and do intentional programming to meet the needs of everybody in their community.
From a professional side in residential life, we are, like I said, we're very intentional in our hiring process to identify people who can have these difficult conversations and who are willing and able to jump in and become acclimated with the students. We have a lot of on-the-job training in residential life. So a lot of it is circumstances and reviewing circumstances after things happen or before. One thing I've appreciated about our current staff is that we are all very willing to have conversations and very in-depth conversations about race, ethnicity, gender identity, and how we can best serve our students. We actually had a conversation right before the semester started as to things that the RAs identified and programs that the RAs identified that we needed to start implementing to better support our students of color on campus and how we were going to have those conversations. So in addition, we are encouraging our staff wherever possible to engage in the learning opportunities that even the campus presents to them. So these panels, Whites Confronting Racism, those types of panels are really good opportunities for us to learn and grow as well.
At the cabinet level, sorry, Mike, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
At the cabinet level, each week in our cabinet meeting, we do something called a leadership intention, where I or one of the cabinet members will walk the cabinet through some exercise where we think about some aspect of our leadership and our leadership across all of the institution. Probably at least once a month, those leadership intentions focus on inclusivity and equity. There were a couple recently where we used specific incidents on campus and had the cabinet reflect on intention versus impact, what you intend when you make an action or you do a communication, and the actual impact that might have on folks. I think we've had a couple of aha moments during those leadership intentions. In addition, when there are opportunities that come up on campus, such as the Whites Confronting Racism weekend-long workshop and the upcoming workshops out of Albright Excellence that will be coming on implicit bias, all cabinet members will be requested to participate in those.
So I have brought an outside person that I have met years ago in several times here to actually provide diversity training to staff members. And it's an individual who I got to know a little bit from some prior seminars, and it's actually a two-person operation that he conducts the training with. Obviously, we haven't done that recently, especially because of with the pandemic that we're experiencing right now. But to me, even more important, I mean, training is good, but sometimes it just goes back to the communication piece. And this is in my opinion, having the conversations with the people that you work with, and also speaking about some of the incidents that have happened, especially recently. It's something I actually intentionally discussed and had conversations with people and on the different shifts here, just because another part of this is their mental health and how they're feeling and how it's impacted them as a person, what their feelings are regarding it. Those things I think were really important. And I think the most important aspect is for them to understand where you're coming from and how you feel about it. Where do you stand within some of the things that have happened? And from my perspective, it's something that I don't have a problem when sharing, sharing with them whatsoever, whether they feel that I'm on the right side of the wrong side of it. But what I do think is it's just important for them to know where you stand as a person. Because one of the things I think that we've seen, and I'm going to say for a very long period of time, is when people don't stand up and they're not counted for. People don't know what your voice is. They don't understand where you're coming from. And therefore, there's a lot of misinterpretation or misconceptions that can be put out there. But by having those conversations, people at least understand who and what you are and where you stand within the situations that are going on. So just standing up and being counted, I think, is an important aspect of moving these conversations forward.
Thank you all. We've got a couple of questions from our participants, and I'm going to answer. The first one says, how are complaints from the students' population regarding RA's performance handled?
So if we receive a complaint regarding an RA, we do receive the complaint. We speak with the student who's filing the complaint to get as much information as possible on that piece. And then we follow up with the RA and the lead RA to see what measures need to be taken to ensure that this situation is addressed. Matt, do you have anything to add, Matt, with that?
Not really, no. We do want to hear how our RAs are doing. And when there's something going on that our students are not feeling comfortable with, we do always address that with the RA and with the RA's direct supervisors.
So any type of complaint that you receive, I think you always have to unpack it. You need to look at it, and you need to figure out what caused the problem. Sometimes it can be miscommunication. Sometimes it's somebody following a policy or, a rule that's put in place, but it was how it was handled or how the communication or how the body language was exhibited by the person that was enforcing whatever it was that they needed to. And then sometimes it just becomes a matter of that perhaps we weren't in the right with how we approached it or how we dealt with it. But then it's also me having the conversations with our supervisory staff and then having the conversation with the person. And sometimes this happened recently within the last week to 10 days where I received an email that a few other people were copied on, and it was, we did the right thing with something that we were following, but we didn't necessarily, there's more that we could have done. So we followed a policy or a protocol, but what we didn't do is we didn't take the extra step to be able to truly help the person. And sometimes you need to look at it from that perspective as well and say, you know what? Yes, we did follow what we were supposed to, but we could have done better because there's an extra step that we could have taken that would have negated the student feeling the way that they felt. And I think that's important because you have to look at it from the whole wheel perspective. Just don't look at it from a narrow point of view, because I think that's sometimes where we end up in some of the situations that we end up in.
We have a second question, and this one says, how much racial diversity is there in housing and campus safety now?
So I don't have the exact number. I can provide that later if wanted or needed, but I can tell you, I think we're diverse. And part of that's intentional. And the reason being is, and I'll put myself out there and say this, I feel when you have too much of any one thing, you're not diverse. And that's, regarding whether it comes from the walk of life that you come from career-wise, whether it comes from your ethnicity, or it comes from your school of thought. And that's something I intentionally try to avoid, because I want those different opinions. I want those different perspectives to come forth. And I think the best way you do that is by not having the same of everything within your area. Plus, I think it helps challenge you also as a person, which personally I like. I think when you're challenged, your best self usually tends to come forth.
So within residential life, our students, staff, We typically run around 50% student of color, depending on the hiring year. For our professional staff, we don't have much racial diversity on our staff. It's something that we are always looking into, but we do have a very empathetic and skilled staff that we have that are willing to have conversations with students. So I think our student staff are very reflective of the student demographic at Albright.
Mara or Eric, the other, if you want to add anything to that before I move on to the next question.
Yeah, just to
Or
piggyback.
Jackie too. Oh yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut somebody off.
No, you're good.
Just to piggyback what Mike said, I think our department, I believe our department is not only culturally diverse, but from experience-wise, we have a wide gamut of experiences. And like he's indicated a little bit earlier, it opens up the dialogue. You get things from a different perspective, different angles based upon those experiences, regimented thought process. And there's at times where you got to almost, you got to work outside the box, think outside the box, and come up with other viable solutions. So with our department, in particular, over the past year and a half, I've seen that grow exponentially. So I definitely think we have a not only culturally diverse department, but I think from an experience standpoint as well, we have a great deal of diversity going on.
The question didn't ask about anything but public safety and residential life, but I'll answer from my perspective. The two places where I focus on hiring and current staff are the cabinet and also the board of trustees. And so we have the trustee and governance committee of the board has now committed to moving the trustees to a membership that is more in line with our alumni membership, which is approximately 24% people, alumni of color. Right now we are at 4 of 29 trustees who are persons of color. On the cabinet, this has been a very high priority for outside searches. Successfully recruited Vice President Dwayne Walker, who's an excellent addition to the cabinet. Couldn't have done better in that hire. It is something that we continue to focus on at all levels and have conversations about and take action on in the cabinet. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. So before I even go to the next question, I have a kind of a follow-up question to that, and it's simply how do we support, how do your department or your team support students in handling, racially charged incidents at our college? How do you support, whether it's your Res Life team or your campus safety team, whether they're students or staff, how do you support them to handle racially charged incidents?
So over the last few years, when we've investigated or looked into one of these incidents, it was important from us from perspective wise, and not just realizing that we're not just looking into it as how it violated a campus code of conduct or Albright's, values and what it holds true for, but then also realizing that these are actual people that are coming forth to you and how it's impacted them maybe from a personal and emotional perspective. And then realizing, that you have to make sure that they understand the resources that are available to them. But then once again, just conducting the conversations that we've had with these individuals from a person-to-person perspective, because usually this is not something that just affects them from a so-called rule perspective, but then also, as I said, it affects them emotionally and deeply. And I think we see that you know, over the past how many months from what's going on in our communities. I mean, people are very emotional. They're very feeling, they're intentional about sharing how they're feeling and how they've been impacted by some of the things that are going on. And just looking at and trying to understand that from, you know, from an emotional perspective, or trying to understand how they actually are feeling and how this is affecting them in their everyday lives, I think is just as important as the investigative process that we have to follow when we're moving forward.
My response is going to be very similar to Mike, and it's working with a student to fully understand their perspective of what happened, and to try to work with them to ensure that their community is safe and that they're comfortable in their community, but also that we're taking steps to ensure that we are educating our community in a way that they understand what actions are causing this incident, and what we can do to prevent it in the future. So it is starting with that conversation and that seeking to understand piece. Having that dialogue, investigating where you need to investigate, and intervening where you need to intervene. I believe we've had a lot of these good conversations, and a lot of tough conversations with students and staff members of how we best support students in these situations. One of which that comes to my mind is thinking, I was working with a student of color who is receiving a lot of microaggressions within an intimate partner relationship, and giving her the power to stand up for herself was really what she needed in that moment, but also connecting her to resources on campus, and colleagues on campus that could also assist her. So again, starting that conversation, that investigation, and the resources is what we do.
And I think one of the things that we focus on with our RAs is that they don't have to fix every problem that they run into or every incident. They don't have to come up with a solution on the spot, but that we expect them to report back to us so that we can offer the support that they need. Our RAs can get in touch with someone on pro staff 24/7. There's always somebody on call for them. And so just making sure that we keep our communication open with them, so that they don't feel like they have to fix everything in the moment, but we can help them and support them through that.
We have another question from our participants, and this basically says, how do we issue do we issue surveys to students to determine their views / feelings about campus life?
I'm sorry, Ibi, do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, so let me rephrase it this way. So for your department, for instance, and the same thing for campus safety, do we issue out surveys to students to determine how they view or feel about campus life? In your case, it'll be how to view or feel about res life, or how to view or feel about campus safety or the administration.
Perfect. So every few years, we do issue a residential experience survey that asks pointed questions about the community, and how you feel, what things are we offering. And that's issued every couple of years. The most recent one was in February of 2020. And I think we are very willing to adjust that survey to get to more questions that people want to see as well.
So for campus safety, no, we do not issue a survey. Not that I'm not willing to, but obviously we'd have to collaborate in order to be able to come up with something. But to my knowledge, I cannot remember one that's been issued.
So Amanda, one of the things that you mentioned was you're willing to adjust. So if someone has an input on questions to ask, and the same thing for you as well, Mike, because you said you're willing to collaborate to have service like this. How can someone reach you with their inputs?
Please email me. That's going to be the easiest way to get a hold of me with your feedback as to what questions should be included in your residential experience survey. And we're happy to review and have that conversation.
So it would be the same thing for me. Obviously, people can reach us at our main office number here, which is 7670 on campus, 610-921-7670 off campus, and I get the messages. Email, which I'm very connected to, at mgross@albright.edu. And if someone doesn't want to share, they want to share something, but they don't want to provide their name on our public safety webpage, there is a Ask the Director piece where you can send something, and it doesn't provide who's sending it, but it does come to my email as well.
So that one goes directly to you, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. We have another question from one of our attendees, and so this person is asking, or they've heard from some of their students that they've been treated differently by public safety or campus safety because they're students of color. And the question is, has Albright evaluated the incidents report and measured the public safety response? So this is, I think it's directed at public safety, campus safety, and also the administration, but it's an open dialogue if you want to start off.
So reports that I have received, I can't say necessarily that they were, it was phrased to me that was directly because of the person's ethnicity or a person of color. But there was things that were brought to my attention regarding, for example, interaction between my staff and people in another area and how we communicated with them. So anytime that I receive something like that, the first thing I do is because usually I receive an email is I actually reach out to the person and I speak to them one-on-one. Because there's so much you can decipher from an email. There's a lot more that you can decipher from actually having a one-on-one conversation with someone. So based on the information I receive, then after that one-on-one conversation, I go back to usually one of our supervisors and I unfold the information that I have. From there, they will usually have the conversation with whoever it is that was involved in this, and we need to find out what do they have as far as how the communication unfolded or what happened, and then we decide where we need to proceed going forward with it. The one thing I also do is I go back to the person, usually a staff member, who brought this to my attention, then I follow up with them and have conversation regarding what we've discovered. So you can kind of see that we try and make sure that we connect all the dots, follow everything in order to be able to arrive at a decision or come back and figure out what exactly went wrong here and how do we need to fix whatever it is that was done wrong. The one thing I'll add is if there's any point in time where we have a discovery where we found out that somebody was acting inappropriately, or if there was something that they said that was inappropriate, they're not going to remain here. Because the last thing that we want or we need is having someone who is not dealing with all students appropriately. So, and I think that's something that's important to put out there. We're about making sure that we're providing students with what they need in order to feel safe here in this campus.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if anyone else want to add to that. If you want to, feel free. If not, I'll move on to the next question, which is kind of along the same line as well. What metrics are your department using to determine if you're meeting your goals around DEI?
I'll take that at an institutional level, and everybody can answer it for their departmental level. It's a great question. So at the institutional level, we are picking apart and creating scorecards to look at things like 4-year graduation, 6-year graduation, retention from first to second year, second to third year, third to fourth year, across all demographics. That would be gender, race, ethnicity, gender and sexual identity as much as we can, to see if we are, if students, if there's any barriers to any groups of students. That is more the equity piece of the DEI initiatives. When you think about inclusivity, a true inclusivity, it's, do people feel like that this is their home, that they belong? And that requires a campus climate survey. In it was will be 3 years ago this spring, Albright participated in the first national survey put out by heads on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was a very comprehensive campus climate survey. We did some analysis of that. Some of that has been the basis of some of the work we've done since then. With the arrival of our new Director of Institutional Research, James Bradley, we are committing to doing it again this spring when heads offers that survey. So we will be able to compare the data to see if we're moving in the right direction. We hope to share that data with Site-C and with the Wellness Council and with also the Albright leadership, so that we can think about the climate on our campus and identify where we might continue to make progress. That's an institution-wide answer to the question. I'll turn it over to the department heads.
So the question, thank you for answering that, Jackie. Let me just repeat the question again, because I think the question, like Jackie answered, is what metrics are your department, what metrics are you using to see if you're meeting your goals around DEI?
Thank you, Ibi. For residential life, I think when we were looking primarily at metrics, it was coming from our hiring and staffing procedures and our training. We do have training assessments at the end of RA training. And also we're looking at the reflection of our RA population and our professional staff population with the student population. I do think we have an area that we'll work with our staff on of how we continue evaluating our that goal.
I mean, I think a lot of how I would answer this goes back to how I answered a question before, and that just, it continues to be, you know, reflective on making sure that you have that you're well represented in different areas as far as who and what you're hiring into your area, into your department. Our student staff is incredibly diverse, you know, within what works here at Public Safety, and we have a very specific training formula that we follow. And then also trying to provide them support, because at times, you know, they work in a challenging job here in our office environment, and just trying to make sure that they have enough training in order to be able to do the job that they have to on their own. And the same follows forward for our staff as well. And, you know, I go back to, once again, I mean, there's stuff that you have to learn that's on pen and paper or on a database, but then there's the difficult part is the conversation piece, because that's the part that unpacks itself when you're interacting with the community, the Albright community here. And when you go into the residence halls, when you're out on the sidewalk, and, you know, the communication you're having with the individuals, and just making sure that the people that we're bringing in here are the people that are able to have those communication, able to have those conversations with our students, and just continuing to move that forward, which I think we've done a pretty good job in doing.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to add kind of a follow-up question to that, which basically is, how do you, as a person, and how does your department continue how would you continue to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion among it, first within you, among your team, and campus-wide?
Ibi, it's I think it's more or less just continuing to have those conversations with coworkers, with students, peers alike, and just being transparent as possible. It's very important, and so that as a group collectively, people understand what perspectives or what kind of angle or view that they're coming from, so that I can kind of get a better understanding of that individual or individuals that I'm working with and protecting on the campus and things of that nature. I just think forums such as this, using that, obviously because of the pandemic, using this particular type of platform to have those difficult conversations and just kind of work through some of those things. And you just kind of try to build upon from platforms such as this and keep the momentum moving forward. The one thing that I've experienced in pretty much all my professional career is that something happens, then we have some serious dialogue and communication. We develop a clear-cut game plan, but then looking at things maybe 6 months down the road, are we still engaging in those conversations? Because a lot of times the topic doesn't go away. A lot of times the incidents don't go away. So we need to continually have these conversations and have this dialogue on many different levels, whether it's from a professor to a student, whether it's student-student, whether it's peer-to-peer administration. There needs to be continual dialogue going on. I think that's how we kind of continue to keep our finger on the pulse and deal with any issues that come up, particularly around race.
So I'll speak for myself within this. I think it's part of it is, and I say that I'm speaking for myself because I think how I handle myself, how I conduct myself is also important for the staff members that I work with in the department here. And that's continuing to grow as a person and continuing, willingness to have conversation, and also, for you to be able to evolve as a person as well. Because I think in any area, when you think you have all the answers, you've allowed yourself to stop learning. You're not going to be able to grow as a person, and you become stagnant. And sometimes the conversations that I have, it opens up my perception to a different point of view. And sometimes it also provides me further reading opportunities. And I say that with a smile because some of the conversations that I've had have given me that opportunity by which to do that. And it's just, you never get too old to educate yourself. And I mean, I know that sounds kind of corny, but I truly believe that. I mean, I'm working on a master's degree right now, and part of the reason I'm doing that is because I still find myself willing to grow and willing to learn. And I do that from a reading perspective as well. There's 2 books that I'm reading right now that are really kind of altering my viewpoint regarding certain things, just as when I went to school later in life it did. And just looking at things from a different perspective sometimes allows you to understand how another person, or other people in their walks of life feel, or what they are going through. And then, having those conversations also with people that you work with, sometimes it affords you that opportunity to be able to understand how they feel or how they're seeing things from their perspective as well. So I guess the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is be open and be genuine as a person.
I think Eric and Mike captured a lot of what I was going to say regarding our department and moving forward. And just to recap, I think it's continuously educating yourself and your department, taking advantage of the opportunities that are available to you, which we've worked with within our department. Also continuing those dialogues among your staff to identify what needs to grow and where it needs to grow, but also ensuring that you still have those authentic, transparent relationships with the students. And I think that's where our department is really going for with our student staff, is those authentic and transparent relationships. And so I think that's where we're headed as far as promoting diversity and equity. And we are committed and happy to hear feedback on those pieces.
Yeah, I think Mike really touched on a lot of what I was going to say too about personal growth. For me, it's really important that I continue to educate myself. I've heard the phrase before, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. And I don't want to be caught in a situation where I should have known something and I didn't. And I also want to recognize too that if I am caught in that situation, then it gives me the opportunity to grow. And so also being able to support the students and the RAs as well when they find themselves in that situation where they don't know something, and trying to give them resources to learn, or even jumping in and learning with them.
I think that the panelists have captured it really well, from Eric saying it's an ongoing conversation, ongoing dialogue on ongoing education, to focusing on continuing to educate yourself and being willing to be self-reflective. And I want to say that this is the entire community. We have to be intentional about it. It has to be ongoing, and it has to involve the entire community. We have to become continue to work to become comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations, whether they be in our residence halls, in our offices, or in our classrooms, or even just in a coffee shop. And that takes ongoing and intentional work, because sometimes it's easier not to have those conversations. We are a learning community. We are about continuing to learn. That's what Albright is about. That's what higher education is about. So I know that we can do it with ongoing and intentional work and effort.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up our last question with kind of a statement that was also made. So this is it's an easy question. It basically asks, do we have an external auditors that indicates where we are and what we need to improve? And if I can tag another question to that, basically, how do we identify? Because one of our attendees observed that based on our experience, it's even hard to basically pinpoint where we are on our growth journey to achieve a higher level of understanding of diversity and equity and inclusion. So how do you as leaders identify people in your team that need to grow in that area, and what do you do about it? And second, do we have an external editors that help us identify where we are and what areas we need to improve?
Ibi, I'll start from the institutional view on the external auditors. It's a really great question. In fall of 2017, my first year as president, when we had the racially charged incident on the football team occur, we brought in an external consulting group, collaborations group, and they came onto our campus a number of times that year. They participated with us in doing the head survey. They provided training. And one of their members has continued to work with Albright since that time, so since those 3 years. And she has she has worked with us to help us to identify. We bring incidents forward to her. She helps us to think through, given what she knows now about our campus and how she's seen it evolve. She works with us to think about the right response. She's been the one who's been working with human resources to develop the Albright Excellence trainings, including the upcoming ones on DEI, to focus on what it appears our community needs. And she will be with us as we evaluate the results from the HEADS DEI survey this coming spring. So she's been the outside point of view who has learned us well enough, but also comes with that outside point of view to kind of pick at us and say, here's a blind spot, here's what you may be missing, this is something you really need to think about. So that has been very valuable. And I know she has worked with several teams on our campus with specific trainings that the department has requested. So that's the external auditor point of view. Ibi, I don't know if you want to repeat the rest of your question. That's the institutional external auditor piece.
Yeah, the rest of the question is, so how do we identify staff members or student leaders who don't know where they are in their growth journey, and how do we basically help them to grow from wherever they are right now to what the next step of their diversity growth needs to be?
I'll jump in here. I think it goes back to something that we've been saying for a good part of this is communication. You obviously don't know how somebody feels about something or who and what they are and what they're about unless you have a conversation with them. And then as far as the growth part, I'm not sure you can necessarily provide a good answer here that really unpacks that, because it depends on the person. Are they willing to look at something from a different perspective? Are they willing to grow themselves, educate themselves, and understand other points of view, or not? And a lot of that goes back to, many of their prior experiences and how they look at things or how they're willing to change regarding that. I can tell you the one thing that I'm going to stick on my pulpit regarding is, you need to make sure that the people that you work with and the people that are working in a higher education environment have the right kind of mentality and have the right communication toolkit by which to be able to interact with the students here. And some of our interview questions are very much predicated on that, because we want to make sure that the people that we're hiring here understand that this is an educational environment. It's not an environment where, when somebody makes a mistake that you're looking to, affect them for the rest of their life. You're looking for them to be able to understand, grow, and learn from a mistake and be able to move forward. And it's really important that you have that kind of mindset working here in what we do.
I think a lot of it begins with that educational piece and helping others identify instances of injustice, of microaggressions, of implicit bias, and then following up with those conversations to disrupt that. And so it starts at the education piece, then the communication and the follow-up and the consistent dialogue after that.
Well, I want to thank you all. Before we go, I want to quickly remind us that we have our 5th panel discussion for this year on December 7th. And here is the artwork for that. This is the invitation for that. Thank you. I want to say a big thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you to all our participants. And thank you for your questions. I always like to say, one of my goals, one of my hopes for doing this is to inspire conversations or help us as a community create or recreate conversations at the student level, the faculty, staff level, the cabinet level. So together we all can grow towards a racially healed Albright. So thank you for your time. And we hope that you share this with your friends, share this with your students and colleagues. And I hope that you'll be able to join us again on December 7th, which will send out emails about that. And I want to thank Beth and Janice. They've been behind the scene. We don't get to see them on this panel discussions, but they've been behind the scene helping coordinate the whole thing and helping me with the questions. So I thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your week.